Hello! Welcome to Common Censored. I'm Lee Camp. This is the show where we talk censored stories and people's sensible solutions and common ground movements to fight and build.
And sometimes other shit.
And the person saying other shit is none other than Eleanor Goldfield.
Hello.
And, we're on the Popular Resistance Podcast Network, if anyone wants to check that out. But welcome. It's good to have you back for another week of this goddamn shitstorm as we get into it. Sometimes I worry that, like, I start off each week the same. I wonder, do I always say this shitstorm? I might always say this shitstorm.
I don't know that you always say shitstorm. I feel like you always sound like things are going to be happier than they really are. Hello,
hey,
everyone.
Everybody.
Like you're inviting someone into a funhouse. Although, technically speaking, a funhouse is the most terrifying place in the world.
Also, it's like a funhouse if it was burning down around you, but you couldn't see outside, so you're just enjoying the crazy mirrors.
Well, no, see, I'd prefer if a funhouse was burning down because then all the clowns would escape, and then I could stab them as they're running away.
Are there clowns in a funhouse, or are you thinking of a clownery?
What the fuck is a clownery?
Well, I don't want to tell you that. It might upset you.
I'm already upset, Lee.
Not a fan of clowns, folks. Not a fan. So, for our primary update this week, Bernie Sanders has won Nevada quite convincingly, something like 47% or something. Pretty impressive win, and I think in no small part it's probably due to the fact that they were supposed to use the Shadow app that had been created by former Clinton staffers and Pete Buttigieg staffers before the Iowa caucuses. But because of the chaos that happened in Iowa, they chose not to use the Shadow app.
Well, did they not end up using the iPad tool?
Yes. I don't want to say that it was fine. I think we were right to be upset about the quote-unquote iPad tool. I think we were right to be upset about that because that doesn't sound much more legit. But maybe the iPad tool was not made by former Clinton staffers and Buttigieg staffers.
Or maybe it's just a situation like we saw in 2008 with Obama where the situation, not the primaries, but the situation was rigged in the general election, but the people who showed up to vote for Obama just overwhelmed what they had stolen.
Right.
So it could be one of those situations as well, which is something that you and I have talked about, Lee, is that the need to overwhelm what they think they have to steal in order to push down someone like Bernie. So that could also be at play here.
And a lot of time their theft has limits. Like their theft is often closing polling places so that all the Bernie supporter, an area that's heavily Bernie, all has to try and get in one polling area, and people aren't willing to wait 3 hours. It's those kind of things. Now, that's not it's not a light switch you switch on for Biden wins. So, yeah, there is a certain percentage they're able to steal or, thwart. And Bernie Sanders seems to be swamping that so far. So when Bernie Sanders won Nevada, as many of you may know, the mainstream media lost their fucking gourds. Holy shit. It just looked like a group of beaten puppy dogs. And I'm going to play some of this on Redacted tonight this week, some of these clips. But Chris Matthews comparing it with the Nazi takeover of France.
Which okay, so I didn't watch this because, unlike you, Lee, I don't know how you do this and still maintain any sort of sanity. But what was
hide the blood trickling out my ears.
What exactly was he saying was comparable in those two instances?
He was like, this is, they just overwhelmed things. They just took over, and this is, very similar to the Nazi takeover of France. They didn't think the Nazis could do it, and they just came in, and it was over.
I'm so perplexed and horrified, and yet,
This is within a week, I think, of when Chuck Todd on NBC and MSNBC said that the Bernie supporters online are like digital brown shirts.
Right.
A reference also to Nazis. So apparently anyone who supports the Jew running for president is a Nazi.
Well, and here's so I think a lot of people are confused by Nazis. because
I am. What the fuck are they doing?
well, I agree. But I've heard this trope several times, which is, but the Nazis were socialist, as if to say that therefore the comparison between the Nazis and socialism is a legitimate comparison because they have the word social in their party name. It's like it's fucking mind-boggling. And for all of those who grew up during the Cold War in this country and are victims of our education system, not at all the fucking same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, the Nazis were not some socialist wet dream that gave free health care to all their people and then also fucking killed 6 million Jews. This is
so not all their people gave health care to the the right people.
So that the comparison is like just totally mind-bogglingly false and disgusting.
And I mean, to see this mainstream, because it's the corporate media basically realizing that that they can't tell they can no longer tell the American people what is acceptable for a leader. They used to be able to just do that. They used to be able to just say, here are the ones that are acceptable, here are the ones that are not. Our newspaper endorsed so-and-so, therefore that is the one that's acceptable, or whatever. And it worked. It worked almost every time. And B, that our corporate media is disgusted by true democracy. Like, when there is actually a democratic process and Bernie Sanders wins, they are revolted by it. It is the unwashed masses standing up and making their voices heard, and they're disgusted by it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's clearly evidenced by them dragging, once again, even after the entire Russiagate flop, they are resurrecting the Russian zombie and making references to the fact that Putin wants Bernie Sanders to win, which is hilarious because then the question arises, wow, Putin has quite some like mood swings, I guess, because he wanted Trump to win, then he wanted Bernie to win.
He wants Trump and Bernie. So what came out was like a Friday or something, right before the Nevada caucus. What are the odds? Interesting coincidence. Right before the Nevada caucus, they were saying the intel community had given a report showing that that Russia also wanted Bernie Sanders. They wanted Bernie Sanders to win, and they wanted Trump to win. And this sounded like horseshit. I mean, you're like, what? This is so fucking pathetic. And I and many others had said, wow, they haven't started blaming Sanders' wins on Russia yet. I'm sure that's coming down the pipe. Mm-hmm. And here it is. And they've now backed off. I mean, it was so flimsy that even the corporate media, even CNN, has backtracked on this statement that the intel community said Russia is pushing for Sanders. They said it was some like offhanded comment by one intel guy or something, and there's absolutely no evidence that Russia has done shit.
But that's what it always is. I mean, if you look, and this is why media literacy is so fucking important, because if you ever read, actually critically read these articles, it always says, well, there are some people in the intelligence community or our source in the intelligence community. Well, who the fuck is that? It could be the guy. Right. It could be the fucking janitor. Like, it doesn't. You don't fucking know. It's always this nebulous, anonymous, and it's like, this isn't about protecting sources. This is about just trying to get out a story that supports some sort of conspiracy theory while making people feel comfortable because they had the words intelligence community in there.
Not to mention, I was arguing with my parents about this. They were like, well, the intel community said bloogity blue. And I was like, the intel community's job is to lie to the American people to achieve anything they want for the American empire. At no point have they said our job is to only tell the truth. They lie, as Pompeo said, they lie, cheat, and steal. They have classes on how to lie, cheat, and steal. That's what he said. That is their job. So, they lied about WMD to get into Iraq. They lied about the collusion in Russiagate. Like, they lie to achieve whatever end is useful for the American empire.
I was actually using that same, train of thought to talk to somebody, because there are a lot of people on the left that buy this fucking Russiagate shit. And if you've ever gone to a Know Your Rights training or any sort of direct action training for folks who have done direct actions or civil disobedience, you'll know they'll usually have somebody from a National Lawyers Guild or somebody explain to you, look, cops are allowed legally to lie to you in order to get you to do what they want you to do.
Right.
So watch out for that. And I said that to my comrade. I was like, so you're with me on that? And she was like, yeah, of course. Cops fucking lie all the time. And I'm like, then why do you think that the people so far above them, like at the top,
The top cops.
at the top cops, why do you think that they would have some sort of fucking moral compass? Like, it is just one long line from the dude directing traffic all the way up. It's just like taught to fucking lie.
I mean, the only difference is the uniform, and even that's pretty similar. It's pretty similar.
Although I will say the traffic cop gets that reflective vest, which could be used as a yellow vest in case of emergency.
Do you think they're easier to turn to our cause because they've already got I already got the vest?
Are you kidding?
I don't care.
They're directing traffic to a bunch of jackass fucking lobbyists in D.C. I think they're way easier.
I want to go on a tangent here and then come back to a little more about the primaries. But speaking of story backtracking, you'll recall that this past week, everyone, and I mean fucking everyone, at least in my weird bubble of media, was running around talking about how they were reporting that Trump had sent someone I never heard of to meet with Assange and say if he said publicly that Russia had nothing to do with the DNC hack, then they would give him a pardon. And this was...
Yeah.
And this was everywhere, and I even had people that are like fans of Redacted Tonight being like, "Oh well, Lee, I guess Russia did do it," and I was like, "Can we step back a second and just remember this is probably a pile of shit? Like, what makes you think this is true?" And not only just like on its surface, like, this seems very unlikely, but the time frame didn't even match up. WikiLeaks tweeted out that Assange had publicly spoken about the fact that Russia was not the source for these leaked emails. He had said that before this supposed pardon was offered to him. So they came to him after he had publicly said these were not the source and said, if you say the source, it doesn't even make any sense. And then Trump came forward and said he doesn't even know who the woman is. I don't know, she was some ambassador or something. And now those our media, like CNN, maybe CNN, one of them, or several of them, are now backtracking on that and saying, "Oh, this might not have been quite right, what we heard."
But of course, the damage is already done.
The damage is done. They
right?
got it out there.
It's like offering a retraction at the bottom of the article once you've already printed it.
Because I think they're although a lot of the mainstream media probably wants to just see Assange in jail for his entire life, and they're just hoping that trial of extradition ends up that way with him being sent to the U.S. to be tortured in a prison
Which started today, by the way.
Which started today. I think that certain factions of the establishment and the establishment press are worried about what's going to come out in these trials, that there may be more information about how it was not Russia. Because it was likely a leak and not a hack. And anyway, we've gotten into that before. I want to go back to the primary for a second. So 538.com, which you should only trust them to an extent. They tend to get numbers wrong because they think that election fraud doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. And so like they got the Hillary Trump election wrong, and they were getting a lot of the results wrong with the primaries last time around. But without election fraud, their prediction, and they have computer models. They run thousands of computer models, and they may be the only outlet that runs that many and has this much not brain power, but computing power put to figuring this shit out. And their models now show that Bernie Sanders is up to a 1 in 2 chance, 45%, of going into the convention with a majority, which would mean he technically is the nominee.
But
and yeah, we covered this before, but if he's below 50%, even if he's running away with it, even if he has 47% and everyone else has 6%, they can push it to a second vote with superdelegates and everything. And he can then have it taken away from him in a move that would certainly guarantee Trump got elected again, because half of the Democrats who voted in the primary would be like, fuck this shit, and would not vote. So that is
like 2016.
certain way to get Trump elected. But just to give you a few more of these numbers. So Sanders had a 45% chance of going in the convention with over 50%, but no one is no one is at 41%. He's got a 2 and 5.
Explain that, Lee.
Meaning they go into no one has a majority. Meaning they go into the convention with no one having a majority. So that's at 41%. So it's still it's neck and neck between Sanders having a majority as he goes into the convention, in which case he is supposed to be the nominee, or he has a lot of them. He's won a lot of the contests, maybe all of the contests, but he still has below 50%, in which case it can be pushed to the superdelegates.
Well, and if you'll recall from the debate last week, when I believe it was the last question, they asked the candidates, do you think that the person going into the convention with the most delegates should be the candidate? Everyone said no, except for Sanders.
And basically this question is, do you think there's democracy should matter?
Do you think people should fucking choose the candidate for president or no?
And the entire stage, or whatever, 4 or 5 other people, all of them said no, except for Bernie Sanders, who's like, yeah, the guy or woman with the most votes should be the nominee. Amazing. Okay, so one more note about the primaries is that Bloomberg, it's now becoming more and more evident, is not in this to win. I mean, I'm sure he'd be fine with winning, but the reason he's okay with spending, it's now over $460 million.
I don't even know what that means.
The reason he's okay with spending that kind of money and not winning, which he's almost definitely not going to win, at least before the convention, is because he started aiming those ads against Sanders. His real goal, and let's remember, he was a Republican, his real goal is just to stop Bernie Sanders. So he's putting ads all over the place, plastering ads all over the place about how Sanders is, horrible, and he's probably calling him a Nazi. But he's also, one of their big points is that he's a millionaire, but he's a socialist. How could there be a socialist millionaire? And this, actually, I think, should backfire, because although they're like, oh, well, it's hypocritical, but really it goes to show that what Sanders is promoting is not some kind of, communism. It's not everyone living in tents and we all have exactly $1. It is still like the countries he talks about having it right, like Denmark, they have millionaires. Like they don't have our situation where we've got 3 people with the same amount of wealth as the bottom 50% of human beings, but they have health care for people. It's stuff like that. Like, that's what he's talking about.
Well, true. And I will say, as a Swede, Sweden is not what it used to be. Sweden isn't Sweden in the perspective of the world, where Sweden is often used as an example of this utopia where...
Right, but you don't have child mortality going up.
No, but we do have more millionaires per capita than the U.S. does. So I'm just saying, like, the concept of Sweden isn't actually what Sweden is today. And I think it's important to mention that I'm actually working on an article of that to make that point. But yeah, I think the point that I made earlier is that do I like the fact that Bernie Sanders is a millionaire? No. But do I like the fact that there are billionaires and millionaires in a country where people are fucking homeless? No, I think it's absolutely fucking disgusting. And do I like the fact that Bernie Sanders is the only fucking candidate that is talking about that and talking about a way to actually address that? Yes, I do like that, because here's the thing. The concept of somebody having a lot of money in a system that is giving everyone health care and a livable wage and housing. Look at Cuba, for instance, where people have all of their housing, they've got free health care, they've got their basic foodstuffs met. There are people that are wealthier than others in Cuba. In a utopian fucking society, no, that wouldn't be a thing because there wouldn't be money, right? But let's talk about reality. And so the idea of millionaires in a society where people have no needs, so to speak, where their basic needs are met, is not really grotesque. What's grotesque is that in the richest country in the world, there are billionaires and millionaires while there are millions of people fucking starving in the streets. That's disgusting. And the only candidate that's actually really talking about a way to address that in any sensical fucking way is Bernie Sanders. Meanwhile, nobody's asking Biden about how many fucking houses he has or Warren about why she's a millionaire. Everything's centered on
Bloomberg
Sanders.
apparently have the same amount of wealth as like the bottom 40% of Americans. Like, it is fucking nuts. And so, I mean, so I think that attack should, but anyway, it should backfire. But anyway, point is, Bloomberg's not just in it to win this thing. He's in it to just stop Bernie Sanders, which is why you probably shouldn't have a Republican billionaire on your debate stage running against the others. I mean, it's fucking hilarious. But
Indeed.
all right, so let's move on to Harvey Weinstein. Your favorite exciting and fun topic.
So folks we're recording this on Monday, February 24th, and earlier this morning, the verdict in New York was handed down against Harvey Weinstein. He was found guilty on basically 2 counts: rape in the 3rd degree.
By the way, big Democratic donor.
Side note, rape in the 3rd degree and criminal sexual assault in the 1st degree, and not guilty on charges of predatory sexual assault and 1st degree rape. So, if you were like me, you read that and you're like, the fuck? First of all 5 charges stemmed from allegations made by 2 women, Miriam Haley and Jessica Mann. And so there's a lot of like, first of all, in cases like this, not every survivor of sexual assault and rape wants to come forward and tell their story because they are ripped to shreds on the stand. So that's number 1. Number 2, not all of them are considered to be legitimate, because in cases of sexual assault and rape, especially in this country, but in others as well, the situation is that survivors are often dragged through the mud and said to be inadequate. What's the word? Witnesses. Because their facts are fuzzy or not straight. And it's like, if you've ever been the victim of a violent crime, I'm not even talking about rape or sexual assault. If you can remember everything specifically that happened in perfect detail, that's impressive, but that's not the norm. Our brains are actually masterful at protecting us from the trauma involved in these kind of situations.
And when emotion is high in a lot of ways, like anger, people that have rage problems, they'll often talk about like not remembering what just happened. Right. They saw red and something happened, and also even with just laughter, like apparently when people are laughing hard, they'll often leave comedy shows, and the moments they can remember are the ones where they weren't actually laughing the hardest. Mm-hmm. So yeah, witness testimony in emotional circumstances is, you're often attacked. And also, as I think a lot of people know, most of these women don't want to come forward because they are still in the industry, and it can destroy their careers to come forward, even if they're not sued into the ground, which is what he used to threaten to do. But it just hurts your careers in other ways.
Right, and a lot of women's testimony was cast aside because Weinstein and his lawyers said things like, "Oh, these people are actors; they're paid to make you believe what they want you to believe," and all of this really grotesque shit that aimed to discredit these survivors. So basically, and I've done a little bit of research. Granted, I haven't gone fully down the rabbit hole here, but the difference, because people listening might be wondering, well, I don't understand. 3rd degree rape, 1st degree rape, what the fuck? Rape is rape. Well, the way that New York State, because this trial took place in New York, in Manhattan, the New York State Penal Code defines rape in the 3rd degree as, quote, sexual intercourse with another person who is incapable of consent, either because they are too young to consent or for another reason. Now, you might be hearing that and being like, sexual intercourse with another person who is incapable of consent, that sounds like rape. That's
Right.
rape, right?
Right.
And yes,
So I can't help they're like drawing a line between like if the person's like drugged or asleep or something, that's
Well,
incapable of consent.
and then another article that I read said that a person is guilty of third-degree rape in New York when they engage in non-consensual sex with another person. And then the description of first-degree rape, which he was not charged with. It says the prosecutor must show the defendant subjected the victim to non-consensual intercourse through forcible compulsion, or that they were incapable of consent by reason of being physically helpless. So,
These all sound like rape.
right, and the only difference is that rape in the first degree seems to hint at, which is why this legalese is such bullshit. The rape in the first degree seems to hint at violence, whereas rape in the third degree doesn't. But newsflash, rape is violence. That's what it is. It's like that saying that I love, which is rape isn't about sex. It's about power and violence. You wouldn't hit somebody with a shovel and call it gardening. Like the bottom line here is that it's rape. And the fact that he got away with a rape in the third degree just shows the giant loopholes that exist in our justice system with regards to survivors of sexual assault and rape.
The loopholes and what happens when you have gazillion-dollar
Of course.
lawyers. So that is another major point.
And he was charged with another thing that he was charged with was criminal sexual act in the first degree, which is the larger of the two things that he was charged with, and that says that a person is guilty of criminal sexual act in the first degree if they engage in oral or anal sex with someone who is incapable of consent, or if they use forcible compulsion. So here again, this is such a fucked up distinction. Why does the orifice matter? The orifice has a completely different charge assigned to it, which is fucking horrifying that it's designated in that way.
Well, in Virginia, it was I think they just changed this like a few weeks ago. They just made sex legal. Because it was in Virginia, it was basically only technically legal to have sex if you were married with the person and then only missionary. So basically any sex in an orifice that wasn't vaginal was illegal.
Yeah, I think
against
that
the
was
law.
the same in North Carolina, actually.
It's fucking crazy. But anyway, back to Harvey Weinstein. So most of you know that he's been a predator for years. This did not come about just the other day. It finally 2 years ago rose to the level, and the journalist Ronan Farrow was willing to do the work to get to the bottom of it and find women that were willing to put their name on it and things like that. And I've been listening to some of his podcasts. I did not read his book, but he was a reporter for NBC and basically had all of this information, had multiple women, had women that were willing to put their name out there and come forward. And NBC, ultimately, the top of NBC, shot it down at the last minute and said, sorry, this story's over. And now in the podcast and in interviews, Ronan Farrow has kind of acted like this was the exception, like NBC does such great work and they have great reporters and they work so hard, and in this case they gave in to the threats of Harvey Weinstein saying every movie and every movie star he's ever worked with would never speak to NBC again if they went forward with this story, and they just caved to it, and it's too bad that they caved in this instance. The one thing Ronan Farrow doesn't seem to get, and in this instance, what he did, I think, was very important, and I think his research was incredible, and he did a lot of important work. But what he doesn't seem to get is this is the norm for NBC and for corporate media in general. They don't go after stories that could hurt them, and that means that also goes for the intelligence community. They don't like reporting things that are bad for the intelligence community, bad for the CIA, because those kind of things tend to come back and bite them, So they won't even occasionally you'll have someone willing to put their neck out and put something out. I mean, with the Pentagon Papers, apparently he tried to get other outlets to get. Finally, the Washington Post at the last minute was willing to put out the Pentagon Papers. Sometimes these outlets will do this because they're afraid it's going to get out anyway, and so they're like, well, we have no choice. But another example was the mass surveillance of American citizens was initially, before Snowden, James Risen had dug it out and under the Bush administration. And if it had come out under the New York Times like it was supposed to, he was working for the New York Times at the time, George W. Bush probably would have lost that election in 2004. But instead, the New York Times said, oh, no, we don't want to do this. It would be bad for us to...
What always amazes me is that every time one of these stories, well, not every time, but a lot of times when these stories come out, they end up being, the subject of like a Hollywood movie or something. And it's like, oh, can you believe how brave these journalists were? Mm-hmm. And I mean, yes, it is. These journalists deserve credit for being tenacious and for going against the grain here. But it's like, do you not get that, like, even if you were just a shallow piece of shit editor at like the New York Times or something, the only way that you ever get cred and get like this national attention for being like a trailblazer is to blaze some fucking trails, is to take chances and trust some people when they come forward with evidence and say, hey, look, this is uncomfortable, but it's fucking true.
Right.
But yet they're like, you know what? We're more comfortable being like the stenographers for the State Department, as you say, Lee. Like, we're more comfortable in the status quo. We don't really want to ruffle feathers, even if there's evidence.
Yeah, and Ronan Farrow talks about this one producer he was with who really liked him and was trying to get this story done, and that producer was so upset when the story was crushed. And ultimately, the producer does stick his neck out and gets upset with the boss at NBC for not putting out this story. And that producer soon after moves on. Soon after moves on, because guess what? It hurts your career to stand up for these things, to stand up and put these things out that aren't good for the network, the corporation. And so again, I'm saying Ronan Farrow did a lot of great work on this, and he clearly has his heart in the right place. He wants to help these women who have and stop these predators, but he doesn't seem to get this step about mainstream media, about corporate media. He doesn't seem to understand also that the reason this story came out at all was because Ronan Farrow is independently wealthy and famous.
Mia Farrow's son.
Mia Farrow and Woody Allen's son, but really
not really Woody Allen.
Really Frank Sinatra's son.
If you just look at a picture, there's no way that this child is related to Woody Allen.
Seems to be clearly Frank Sinatra's son. But anyway, but he's independently wealthy and independently famous, if that's a term, a phrase. He's famous. He's got a famous family, so he has no worry that his career will be over or that he'll never be able to make money again. Right. And so he left NBC when they wouldn't air this story and went to, I can't remember if it was Vanity Fair or New Yorker, but went to a separate outlet and puts this out. Now, your average journalist gets to that point where the network says no, and they go, okay, fuck, on to the next story. And like, that's the norm. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he quite understands that he was in a privileged position to even do what he did. And thank goodness he did. Now you're seeing some of the ramifications, and it has actually brought down a major movie mogul who was a longtime predator. Yeah. And one other point I wanted to make about this was that, of course, you won't hear in your mainstream media, and maybe won't hear from almost anyone else, is Weinstein was not just a sexual predator. He was also a vicious bully. He had a crazy temper. He would scream at people, like bloody murder. He would throw shit at people. People were legitimately scared of him, and he would cheat people out of things. He would option scripts and just never pay the people. And I guess his lawyers were powerful enough that when they said, okay, well, I'm going to give it to someone else, they said, no, you can't. I don't know. I don't quite know how it worked, but he would option scripts and not pay people. He would, and I'm sure all of this went into the way he treated his actors, the way he got his movies promoted. If you don't promote this movie, then I'm never going to give you access to another Miramax movie in your life. All that kind of shit. And what did he do? He rose to the top of Hollywood, because that is how unfettered capitalism works. It is the biggest bully in the room, the biggest asshole, the guy who is able to strategically screw the most people over and get to the top is the one that wins. And this is not unusual. It's a little bit different when there is a creative craft involved. So if you are an actor, you have to be a somewhat good actor. You probably have to have good looks. You probably have to have certain things going, not necessarily good looks, but a lot of the time. You have to have certain things going for you. So it's a little different when there's a creative art. It's a little different when there's a sport. Obviously, you have to be the best tennis player or whatever. But in terms of running things, running these businesses, being at the top of these businesses, it's almost exclusively basically sociopaths and those most willing to screw the others. Jeff Bezos knew that he could push workers to the breaking point in America harder than any other business has tried.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of a line from your stand-up, Lee, where you talk about how the Me Too movement made it so that a lot of people in media, in news media, were fired for sexual assault or sexual harassment,
like Matt Lauer, Charlie
right.
Rose.
And your line is, I'm not going to try to do it, but it's basically about like, why is this the only thing that people are fired for? And it basically highlights the issue that while we are beginning, and I say beginning because we still have not understood that sexual harassment and sexual assault are fucking horrifying and unacceptable in any situation. We're beginning to recognize that is an offense worth, dethroning someone like Weinstein for. But, like completely oppressing and what's the word? Persecuting the people who work for you, like a la Bezos, where his employees can't even find time to piss, where they're passing out because of lack of like actual air circulation where they work.
There's at least one instance where one legitimately died on the warehouse floor.
Right. This is not enough to dethrone someone like Bezos. And so the question becomes, if we're beginning to recognize that sexual assault and harassment are worthy of dethroning someone like Weinstein, why isn't this sort of oppression that is inherent to capitalism and the need for sociopaths to rise to the top, why is that not sort of that sociopathy and that oppression enough to dethrone someone?
Damn straight.
Also, one more thing about Weinstein, he's also facing, so these charges that he was convicted of, the third-degree rape and the criminal sexual act. The criminal sexual act and the first degree could carry a sentence between 5 to 25 years in prison. The rape in the third degree carries a sentence of 1.5 to 4 years in prison. And again, just hold on to that for a second and remember that according to what I've read here on The Cut, the difference between the rape in the third degree and the criminal sexual act was the orifice and potentially the use of force, which again is a fucking moot point because rape cannot be done without the use of force. So just hold on to that for a second and realize how absolutely fucked up our quote unquote justice system is, that these are the ratios, so to speak, of what someone like Weinstein is facing. So his sentencing hearing is on March 11th, but he's also facing charges in Los Angeles. So California and New York have to now figure out what the fuck they're going to do in terms of, moving him from one place to the other to face charges. So it's a bit of a mess and something to stay up to date on. But folks are also pointing out, I don't want to end on a total fucking downer. Folks are also pointing out that this is an important moment. And in particular, it's an important moment for survivors who not just feel that they have been silenced, but have been silenced and have not been believed. This is an important moment to show that you can bring people down for sexual assault and rape. It is possible, and we need to continue to work towards that and work towards accountability, even of the most high ups in our society.
Some quick things before we move on to a few more topics. This show is completely sponsored by you, the listener. We don't have any ads. We don't have anyone sponsoring it that is other than an individual. And that individual is you, hopefully. Patreon.com/commoncensored. That's where you can get all the shows if you don't get them elsewhere. And it's also where you can sign up to be a member at just $1 a month, or you could do $4 a month and get extra content. So that's patreon.com/commoncensored. The reason this show's gone on this long is really thanks to you guys. My book tour begins this coming weekend, actually. Dallas and Austin. I'm heading your way this weekend. Then soon thereafter, Flagstaff and Tucson. Eleanor Goldfield may be opening for those shows. Yet to be determined. New York City, Montreal, Columbus, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Toronto. It's all at redactedtour.com. I'll be announcing dates in the UK soon as well. And Eleanor will be in Denver. What's that date?
I will be in Denver with Emily Yates. She's a war vet. And we will be performing at the Mercury Cafe in Denver, Colorado on March 19th, which is the 17th anniversary of the most recent Iraq War. So please.
The most recent
Well,
Iraq
I say
War.
that because it's like, holy shit. I mean, pick one. And so you can find out more information about that by going to my website, artkillingapathy.com, and clicking on performance. And that's where you'll find info on that. And yeah.
My book is now shipping.
Yay!
So if anyone wants one, it's at
It's awesome.
leecampbook.com. And I'd love for you guys to write reviews, tell people about it. That would be awesome. It's got tons of information in there. Information galore. Just today I was quoting from the column on the 18 ways Julian Assange changed the world, and it's like the 18 biggest stories that WikiLeaks released. And anyway, that's leecampbook.com. I think that's all for now. Sign up to our email list by texting the word censored to 33777. Okay, let's keep
going. Yes.
Maybe.
And
I
we're
think.
going to
Could be.
we're going to end on a high note because I feel like we need it, right?
Okay, I'm worried as to what our high note is.
So this just happened. This just happened today. Climate activists are celebrating a big victory after forcing a company to abandon proposed tar sands project. So, if folks have watched my show Act Out, which is ending this coming week, but
Hold on, explain more. Why is your show ending?
So my show Act Out, my weekly show. A lot of folks might be familiar with it or have watched it. Is not so much ending, but evolving. Walking upright, maybe. So we're going from a weekly show to deeper dives and longer form pieces. So the weekly show has been going on for quite some time, and we felt like it was time for a change. So our first longer form piece will be about West Virginia and the coal and fracking areas there, and the radical past that is trying to shape a radical future. So be on the lookout for that.
Hypothetically, if someone were to want to help out this project to make sure it happens and happens well, how would they do that?
I'm so glad you asked. Thank you. I'm such a shitty capitalist, everyone. But if you want to help me continue to do this work, because unfortunately, deeper dives require deeper pockets, you can go to patreon.com/actout, and you can see a video there that sort of explains a little bit more what we're working on. And I definitely appreciate all of the support. All of that money goes straight into the reporting. None of it goes to an extra house or anal bleaching or anything like that.
So the anal bleaching comes right out of your own pocket, is what you're saying?
I have a trade situation
barter.
set up.
You barter
yeah.
the anal bleaching.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I feel that's only fair.
Should I ask what you give them for the barter?
Mainly
cat food. They need cat foods.
Well, no, there's some wildlife, fish and wildlife mostly. So But on this past week's episode, the second to last episode, I spoke to a media coordinator from Wet'suwet'en territory in so-called Canada, who was talking about the ongoing efforts there to push back the invading forces. And it's important that we say they are invading forces because Wet'suwet'en never actually ceded their territory.
The
so
invading
it is
oil forces.
Well, no, Canada is the RCMP is an invading force
Oh,
because
you mean the mounted police?
because the issue, whereas in the U.S. there are treaties, as twisted and corrupt as they may be, not all of the tribes in so-called Canada signed such treaties. The Wet'suwet'en and the hereditary chiefs were not. Were one of the ones that did not sign any treaties. So they live on what's considered to be quote unquote unceded territory, which means that they never ceded their territories to Canada. So literally, this is a matter of Canada, a nation built on Indigenous land, of course, invading a sovereign nation of the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs.
Is this the high point we're into?
No, I have a fucking backstory. First with the show, now with this. I need a PowerPoint. But anyway, so if you watch, I'll just say this: go watch the episode. It'll become more clear for you if you're not already in the know, so to speak. But anyway, that fight against fossil fuel energy and imperialism and colonialism is still ongoing. But at the same time, this high note, there it is, Lee. This high note.
I was so excited for the high note. You
that activists
sitting here with a boner.
Well, that's uncomfortable. That activists are celebrating is the Tech Resources on Sunday withdrew its application to build a tar sands mine in Alberta. And the CEO admitted that because of, quote, growing debate, which is fucking stupid, over fossil fuel use amid a climate crisis, quote, it is now evident that there is no constructive path forward for the project. And this guy, obviously, since he's saying, quote, growing debate, is not pulling out of this project because he woke up and said, you know what? I'm being an asshole. We shouldn't build this mine.
Because the people that get to the top of those corporations.
Exactly.
Sociopaths.
Callback
Sociopaths.
to a previous point.
Yeah.
He made this decision because of the continued work and continued pushback from folks on the ground and these grassroots climate movements saying, go fuck yourself. And Emma Jackson from 350.org made it clear. She said, quote, make no mistake, they're pulling out of the project because people are standing up to demand real climate action. So this is a big move. And if you've ever seen images of the Alberta tar sands, then you know how devastating these projects are. And the fact that one of them has been abandoned is big news. And it also speaks to the power of these grassroots climate movements, how important they are, and how important it is that we stand in solidarity with each other on these front lines.
Absolutely. Can we squeeze in the story about the Greyhound?
Okay.
It's so good.
Okay. So
it's another high point.
Just a couple of
Two
days
high
ago.
points.
Well, I sort of attached it to not a high point, which
Okay.
is the fact.
That's what we do. That's what we always do.
Well, now you're making me do it.
I mean, you gave us a sob story about the Indigenous before we got to the last high point.
So basically earlier this month, in the middle of the month of February, 100 U.S. Customs and Border Patrol protection officers, including those from the SWAT-like Border Patrol Tactical Unit, will be deployed between February through May across 9 sanctuary cities: Chicago, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Houston, Boston, New Orleans, and Newark, New Jersey. And folks, sanctuary cities, for a recap, or for those who don't know, are basically cities that have made it clear through their governing bodies that they will not be cooperating with ICE and Border Patrol. So basically, the Trump administration's response to that is, fuck you, we're sending in the SWAT team.
Which are like, I mean, we got to be honest here. ICE in these situations are like fascists, constitutional rights breaking assholes. They're not, that's why these cities have said, we're not going to cooperate with this.
And so recently, and you may have heard that Border Patrol and ICE are not just, knocking down doors. They're also getting on board buses and things like that to do what they call quote unquote immigration checks.
Sounds, now I think the analogy is apt, a lot like Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
Show us your
Deine
papers.
Papieren. Fucking seriously. So basically, and Greyhound, for instance, is a company that is very popular for folks who don't have a lot of money. And I know this from experience. So what happened a couple of days ago is that Greyhound announced that it would stop letting Border Patrol agents conduct, quote, routine immigration checks on its buses, which, fuck yeah, that's awesome. But the story doesn't end there.
There was an amazing driver, a superhero, some might say.
I want to be friends with this bus driver. So witnesses on one such bus that was being accosted by Border Patrol and ICE agents, witnesses said that a bus driver told an ICE agent to gargle his balls when the ICE agent requested to enter the bus. And I'm ending on that because you can't do better than that.
Well said, bus driver. You are our hero of the day. I put that right up there with Rosa Parks. I mean, of bus justice.
Yeah, bus justice.
Of justice that has happened on buses. I put it right up there. Thank you all so much. We're headed over to do a little extra 10 minutes at patreon.com/common censored. Come join us for one more story over there. Yeah, you can support us and become a member because we don't have any ads. We don't have any corporate sponsors. It's all you guys. So patreon.com/common censored. Until next time.
I'm at artkillingapathy.com as well.
Man.
I know I dropped the baton. I'm sorry. But I just wanted to throw that in there.
And all of the redacted clips are at youtube.com/redacted.
And his book is at leecampbook.com, and it's fucking awesome.
All right. Until next time.
Act out.
Keep fighting.